Hello, everyone. Welcome back. It's now the 3:30 session, and for those of you who are just joining us, welcome. So I guess we'll just begin by saying that this specific session is on the topic of embracing racial equity, diversity, and inclusion in the Canadian music industry. And we'll just begin by introducing ourselves. So I'll start first. Hi, my name is Carina Lam. I play the euphonium. I'm based out in the Toronto area. I freelance around, but I play in groups such as the Royal Hamilton Light Infantry, Weston Silver Band, Hannaford Street Silver Band, and Tuba Quartet Yuba. And I identify as Chinese Canadian. My mom is from Hong Kong. My mom is from China, and my dad is from Hong Kong. Apologies. And they immigrated here in the mid to late 80s. And it was all because it was an idea and a desire of my mom's dad, my grandfather, who wanted for everyone to start a life in Canada for the sake of just having a better quality of life politically and socially. So now fast track 30 years, here I am today having this lovely conversation with this group. So thank you. Over to Vanessa.
Hi, my name is Vanessa Ng. I play trombone. I'm currently studying at the University of Toronto. I'm based in Markham, and like I said before, I go to Toronto for school. Both my parents are from Hong Kong. They moved here maybe a little over 25 years ago. And yeah, I'm just so glad to be here and to have this conversation, and I'm really excited.
Kathleen?
Hi there, I'm Kathleen Griffiths. I play the E-flat horn. Some people call it tenor horn, some people call it alto horn, but I think it's safe to just say E-flat horn, which is commonly used in a lot of brass bands. However, I did go to school for French horn. I did my undergraduate degree in music ed at U of T, and I've been playing both instruments for a while now. I identify as Black. My ancestry comes a lot from the Caribbean. My dad is from Jamaica, and my mother's family is from various islands in the Caribbean as well. But my mother and her father were also born in Canada. So we have a little bit of generational Canadian on that side of the family. But my dad did move here from Jamaica when in the 1970s when he was in high school.
Michiko.
All right, so my name is Michiko Singh, and I currently play fourth horn in the Winnipeg Symphony Orchestra. I'm also on their newly formed Diversity and Inclusion Committee. I am 50 years old, and I was born in Kitimat, BC, and my mom's Japanese Canadian, and my Japanese family came over from Hiroshima in the late 1800s, and they got interned during World War II and dispossessed and had to be relocated. And on my dad's side, my dad is from Trinidad, and I'm not exactly sure what year he immigrated to Canada. And he is the ancestors of indentured servants from India and an enslaved person from Africa. But I'm actually not that, I don't really know a lot about my dad because he passed away when I was 7. And I'm really happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Great, thank you so much. So I just wanted to begin by just expressing that, it's such a privilege to be a part of this discussion panel. I do want to acknowledge this panel is, we're leading it. And I just wanted to thank everyone for your generosity of sharing your story and perspectives. And, we're here today to talk about systemic racism and how the impact of it and share a little bit about our vision for the future. Just wanted to make it really clear that we're not subject experts in this topic. We're sharing from our own perspectives and experiences and not here to solve any problems. if throughout this conversation in the next hour, if you feel any sort of discomfort, we just invite you to lean in on that discomfort as we share our stories. And we also ask you to just listen and, take the time to let things digest. Another thing I wanted to share is that just generally in our search and putting this discussion panel together, I was quite surprised to discover that there are really so very few racialized Canadian female brass musicians pursuing higher level music, and even fewer in the professional space. So I just wanted to acknowledge the fact that, we are a small subset of the minority. We are speaking for ourselves, and the absence of the representation is part of the conversation. It's important to identify that and kind of just acknowledge that this is where we are in this stage. So as well, finally, I just wanted to say thank you so much to everybody who has pre-submitted questions. So we do have some answers lined up within this discussion. Does anyone have anything to add to this, or should we just dive right into our conversation? Okay, great. Sorry, did someone say something? Yes, the life of a Zoom call. You're on mute. Okay. All right. So one of the first questions that we wanted to talk about was actually brought up by Michiko. And the question is, how old were you when you realized that you were a race, and what circumstances made you realize that? Michiko, would you like to start?
Okay, well, of course, I realized that very early on because my parents got married, I guess, in the 60s, and interracial marriage was not a thing for either of their races or for society. And so a lot of people were talking about it before my birth. But then, like, because I was born in Kitimat, there wasn't a lot of diversity in that small town up north. And so we were much the curiosity, my brother and I. And so I guess I finally realized that I was not like the other people when I was in kindergarten, when I went to public school. So that's my story.
Kathleen? Yeah, so
yeah, sure, I can go next.
Just unmute yourselves, and because this is just a conversation here, right?
Yeah, for sure. So I grew up in a very white neighborhood in Mississauga. At my elementary school, you could really count the number of minority families on one hand. And it didn't take me long in elementary school to realize that I was Black. But also from a very young age, I was taught to celebrate Black excellence. My grandfather was the first Canadian-born Black judge, and we were often going to events to celebrate his achievements and other Black Canadians' achievements as well. But it wasn't really until later on that I realized why it was so important that we were celebrating Black excellence in the first place. I just kind of thought that it was, we as a community were recognizing the achievements of our own, but it was so much more than that we were celebrating these achievements.
So I grew up in Toronto, and I actually moved to Markham at the age of 10, and I realized, at least when I was in Toronto, that I wasn't the norm. I wasn't white, right? So, and that was just really obvious to me because, especially in the musical context, there would always be posters of musicians in the music room, like just posing with their instrument, but there would never be any female brass players or people of color or any of that. It was all just white men with their trombones, like on their motorcycle or whatever. And just even looking around just like that, I just instantly knew. Yeah.
I know the poster you're talking about.
For myself, I believe I was in the first grade. I grew up out west in Vancouver, BC, and in the community that I grew up in, there were a lot of Chinese immigrants, both Cantonese and Mandarin speaking. So I think when, growing up, my mother tongue was Cantonese. And so as a result, I was speaking Cantonese with my other Cantonese speaking friends at school. And I remember there was this one time, and actually several times, and I can't remember exactly, the moment, but it was very common for our teachers to say, you're not allowed to speak anything except for English. And while, and I know understanding that the reason is because we want to be, practice communication and get into, making sure that we're speaking English in school. But I think for me, I made it mean something else. Like I made it mean that speaking Chinese is not good. And I think that ultimately impacted the way I lived for the next 20 years before I reevaluated my identity and things like that. So I guess we can go into the next question. Really, is we were just kind of like sharing, because we planned this call here, but just we don't really have well, like I'm speaking for myself, but I don't often share experiences of whenever I've had an incident where I had experienced racism or racist behaviors, or I've been on the receiving end of it. And so, this is just kind of wanted to share some of that to the audience, to just provide an opportunity to, tell a story and just convey that these are real life experiences for us. So, so to the group, have you experienced racism in the music space? And what did that look like?
For me, it just looks like when, these racist behaviors are normalized, and we can even see in some larger institutions that there are still racist productions happening. And for me, the worst feeling is seeing people defend these productions. And I just know that, starting today, yesterday, for all of time, we're always going to make steps and work towards anti-racist institutions everywhere. That's basically it. Just racism for me, it sucks the most when you see it in these big systems.
I think for me, racism has been an everyday lived experience, but I just kind of ignore it because what can you do, right? But recently, with the summer Black Lives Matters movement and then becoming more involved in committee work in my orchestra, I've been grappling with it more and actually talking about it instead of just bottling it up. So, and it's actually quite exhausting. So.
Yeah, for sure. I just know that it's hard because you sometimes when you're going through it, right, you don't even understand what's happening, or you're caught off guard in the moment. And I recently attended a webinar that was just talking about the impact of it. And this healthcare worker was just talking about how whenever there is an incident that occurs, the emotions that are felt are things like anger, fear, or even depression, and confusion. Confusion is the final one. And a lot of it, if it keeps on happening on a daily basis, it actually ends up becoming traumatic for that individual, right? And not having an outlet to let it out or talk about it or figure out how to cope with the impact of that can be really it's exhausting, like what Michiko had said. So, and I do remember that, there are some times where I have myself just called out instances and realizing that it wasn't quite well received, not validated. And for me, it was kind of discouraging for me to speak up in the future. I always consider, like, am I in a safe space to speak up at this moment, or is this just going to cause me more emotional grief to speak up? And that also contributes to that as well. So it's almost like a double-edged sword where, you know, do I make the choice to internalize it and sort it out myself, or do I, you know, do I just leave it at that, right? So.
Yeah, and I also think that where I am in my work, it's like I have networks because I have been doing this work for a while. I can talk to people outside of the music industry, and it seems like they are often decades ahead of us in this work, and that symphony orchestras in particular are the last bastions of white supremacy, just because of the previous session that I just watched, because it's all built in like that. And musicians think that they're leftist, like they don't like Trump and they're liberal and all that. And they don't realize how privileged they are and how up in their ivory tower they are. And they don't really listen to the people of color that are already in the organization. And that's why it's also exhausting. So.
Yeah, I have to agree with Michiko in just saying that, yeah, it's always built into the institutions, and even things that you don't think are racist actually harm racialized people. And it's really important to sort of lift that veil and have everyone realize that you have to be hyper aware of your actions, and inaction is the worst thing that you could ever do. You should always be working towards anti-racism, or else you're racist, basically. Yeah.
And I think one of the things that has held our societies and our orchestras back from that is the fact that there isn't that representation of people of color to begin with. And without that representation, there aren't those people who are fighting back against the system. They've kind of realized, okay, well, this is how it is, and no one's saying anything, so it seems to be fine. So that's all that, like, that's all there is to it. So I think something that I've personally had struggles with in the past is the fact that there's not that representation there. I've always been kind of one out of 2 or 3 Black people in a group of 30 or 40 musicians. In the brass band world, in high school, in university circles as well, which has really been, really impacted me, I guess. And I found like my identity was often lost in that, because I ended up being kind of the token Black girl in the group, or one of 2. I was often mistaken for someone's sister or them, and it didn't matter if we didn't play the same instrument or whatever. It was just they saw me for my color rather than my personality. And I think that's something that I really lost being in these different groups. And yeah, some experiences that still happen would be like after a concert, one of my friends who happens to also be Black would have done a solo or something, but I would be getting the compliments after, or I'd be asked, oh, how's your sister doing, when really they mean someone else's sister that just happens to be Black as well. They don't see me for Kathleen, the horn player who loves to dance or something. They see me for the Black girl in the group. And something actually that made me realize how important the representation was for me in those groups was one of the events that the Canadian Staff Band did a couple of years ago. That's one of the bands that I'm in with the Salvation Army. And they had a 50th anniversary special where we invited a few more of the brass bands in the United States to come up. There were 5 of us brass bands in total, and that was held at Roy Thompson Hall. But they, in those groups in the US, they have a significantly higher representation of Black people in their groups. Mind you, I was still the only woman out of everyone, but actually being able to spend that time with people who share those same passions as me, and actually look like me was like, it was almost indescribable. It brought this sense of warmth and comfort that I'm not used to in these groups. And at the end of the concert, we even gathered all together and took a picture of all the Black staff band musicians. And it remains one of my favorite pictures of all time, because it finally gave me that sense of community, even if it was just for a weekend in the brass band circle. And it just showed me how much representation can really matter in a group.
Yeah, I have actually a kind of a funny story similar to that, but like you're saying that other people always get you mixed up with some other Black person. But my mom actually got me mixed up with with somebody at my Juilliard graduation, because there was this other Chinese Indian person from Australia, Adele Anthony. She's like a really awesome violinist soloist. And I mean, she was in my graduating class, but I didn't really have any classes with her. And although she's really cool and everything, I didn't really hang out with her that much. And then back in the day before digital cameras, my mom, she took pictures at my graduation, and then we were looking through the pictures, and I was looking, I'm like, Mom, why do you have all these pictures of Adele Anthony walking across the stage to get her diploma? She's like, oh, well, I thought that was you. You know, I'm like, oh. So I mean, it's like true. It's just Adele and me, you know, it's accepted, right? And then I'm 50 years old. So just a few years ago, I taught like a band clinic at this school in the Maples in Winnipeg, and it's predominantly Filipino and East Indians. And I walked into a room, and there was a whole classroom full of middle school girls that were horn players that all looked like me. And I was just shocked. And I had to like go out of the room and come in again because I just couldn't believe it. So yeah, it's a thing, the representation. But it is getting better. There's more and more people. And then with numbers, more and more people are speaking up about the inequities. And it's a hopeful thing. It's like the jaded people like me that thought there was no hope. I'm seeing that there is actually hope. So.
I do want to share something. It's a bit of like, can segue into talking about things like microaggressions. So I do have a story to share. There was this one student that I was teaching many years ago. So this person will remain anonymous. And student was doing great. And then at the end of the lesson, I had a conversation with their mother. Mother was asking, oh, how is my kid doing? How was the lesson? And then I basically summarized what happened in the lesson and what were the key takeaways from that lesson. And then I actually offered tips to this mother on what to do and what to look out for if in the event she does see her kid at home practicing and, and practicing with poor habits. And so I basically said things, I don't know, watch out for 1, 2, 3, whatever. And what happened was the mother, who is white, just stared at me blankly. And I was like, what's going on? And she said to me, she's like, your English is so good. And then I was like, well, thank you so much. I appreciate it. It is, my primary language. And sometimes like just an interaction as simple as just commenting about that, because I'm making the assumption she's talking to me like that because of the way I look, and she had a different expectation of what my accent would sound like. So, and then it just sometimes like, I have better days, and sometimes I, make a joke to kind of, laugh it off and just not make the interaction so awkward. But sometimes I'm just thinking like, are you like, how do I come across? Like, did what I say even sink in? Like, did that even matter? Or was that completely overlooked because you were so fascinated by the way I was talking? And so like things like that. Sometimes I also just wanted to kind of raise awareness and just share with people that sometimes I do have a lot more conversations about my background and how I look and who I am, what I do. And I feel like sometimes I do get interrogated with all these questions and not being asked sophisticated, smart music questions. And it doesn't, like, I feel like I'm representing a race or something, and that can bring me down sometimes. So I'm not sure if anyone else relates in this group here.
Yeah, and I think just even the question of, oh, so where are you from? No, where are you really from? Because that happens, and I understand that people are curious because they see the exotic nature of you, right? But it's kind of, well, like, I'm Canadian. That's that's me first and foremost. If you want to know more, like, we can have authentic discussions and you can find out more about me a bit more organically. But for people to just that's the first thing they want to know, it's a little off-putting.
Yeah, just like what Carina said, they're really just seeing you for, for me, like my Asianness, but they aren't seeing you for who you are as a person and like who you are as a musician. This really reminded me of situation. Whenever I meet new people and I just have conversations, they always, I say, oh, I'm a musician. I study music at U of T. And they always ask me, oh, what do you play? Piano, violin, flute? Like, no, I play the trombone. They're like, you're so small. How can you hold that? How does that work? And I was like, how do you hold anything? Like with your arms, right? So it's always with these stereotypes, with people of color or Asian people in particular, that, you're small, you're dainty, you can't play these big boy instruments like the tuba or the trombone or anything like that. And even with my own parents, they keep asking me, one time I had to take a flute class because I do music education, and I tried it out. It did not sound very good. My own mother said, that sounds great. Do you want to switch? And I was like, Mom, I'm in the first year of my undergrad for trombone. I'm not switching. Please stop asking me to switch. And it's just crazy out there. Just with, again, with Asian parents, I have sort of a family friend who plays oboe, and my mom I know it's a very common thing in Asian families to compare your kids with other people's kids, and my parents still say, oh, look, she plays oboe. It's so small and dainty and elegant and all these things. I'm like, the trombone can still be all of those things. Both instruments are amazing in their own right, and just let me play trombone.
Yeah, I actually think it's a dangerous mix to be Asian and a small woman playing a brass instrument, because I can play and win a job behind a screen fair and square, and then when the screen comes down, there's 2 years of probation. And then after I just demonstrated that I could play fortissimo, they look at me and they think I can't play over mezzo piano. So then I have to play super like a pig in order to get tenure. But because there's no screen for my protection and they have biases. So that's very unfortunate, but I don't know really how to overcome that. If anyone has any advice, let me know.
Well, maybe we can talk a little bit about, when we do experience these incidents, what are some things that you do to manage and cope?
Well, personally, I play really loud like a pig. Really unmusical, and then I get tenure. Works every time.
Definitely for my parents, they see things very maybe black and white. So if I say, look, I have achieved these things, I've won these competitions on trombone, then it helps them a little bit, but it's still work in progress. And I'm fortunate that my parents listen to me when I talk to them, but yeah, definitely a long way to go.
Well, I'm 50, so I have a network of people I can vent to that are safe to vent to. But I definitely identify people that have experienced the same things I have. I wouldn't just vent to somebody who wouldn't understand and would make it worse because they might say something offensive. So, and I also have friends outside of music. So I could say the truth of what's going on at work and it's not going to get back to work. I won't get fired or anything. So I highly recommend having friends outside of music.
So I guess I can go next. Yeah, sometimes I think I just need to remind myself that, like, you are in control of your life and you are in control of who you spend your time and energy with. And sometimes I like, while you want to make things right and, um, you know, be complete and resolve, just like close the book on this and move on with the rest of your life. Sometimes the incidents are left unresolved and you just have to let it go. So I've just spent a lot of time really reflecting on that, and having someone that you trust that is there to kind of listen to you and support you really does make a world of difference. But the first and foremost is kind of, like the bit of the self-talk really does help. Like, sometimes, I've had incidents where I'm on my way to a rehearsal and something happens to me on the street. And then 5 minutes later, it's downbeat time. And so I can't be in that headspace, and I need to shift it right away and get focused. So sometimes I go to music as kind of my safe haven, and I really hope and wish for the best that every time I step into a music space, that it is a safe space, and then I can really just focus on cultivating that creativity and making music, and let that playing do the talking. Just like lots of positive self-talk for me just helps me out, and then venting next. Kathleen, do you have anything to share?
Quickly, I can just say that it has helped having other racialized individuals, even if it's just one or two other people in the group that I can talk with, because a lot of times, even if our experiences aren't the exact same, there are similarities. So being able to talk with those people after rehearsal or whatever has been something that I've kind of relied on. But I think moving towards a spot where I'm able to talk to people who aren't actually experiencing these things so that we can have actually solve things would be great. Because if we're just holding it in between the people who are facing it, then it's going to be a little bit harder because other people won't actually notice that maybe there's a problem in the first place. So actually having those discussions with people who are not of a racialized community, I think in the future will certainly help.
I also think that it's healthy for you to have a balance. Like, don't just have music is your thing and nothing else. Like, I think you should have some other activities that you do, hobbies and stuff that you won't go insane. And also, like, pick your battles. Like, you can hold it in at some times, but then if you're gonna be working towards changing, like substantial change, you have to prepare for a marathon and not just one little battle. Like, it's going to be a long time before we see any substantial change. So we got to prepare for the long haul.
So I guess this is a perfect segue to the next topic discussion is, what are the holes in our pipeline? So, we were talking about how there is a disproportionate gap in representation between the education system and the professional landscape. And, like as we had said before, there's so few of us in the older generations in this music space. And, as we go down in late younger generations, there's more and more people speaking up and more inclusion. So let's talk a little bit about that. Like, what is the state of our education system from our perspectives?
Yeah, I can start. Being that I am a music teacher, I teach grade 8 right now, but usually it's 6, 7, 8 music. And as a music educator, this is a topic that we're working with on a daily basis, really, because we are seeing that gap between people who are doing music as something that's mandatory for them, and people who are continuing after that. I myself went to an arts high school in Peel, Cawthra Park, and there was very little representation of people of color in the music stream. And yes, that's changed slightly, but I know in Peel there's still a difference between the representation of our community and the representation that we're seeing in art schools. And one of my jobs is to figure out how I can be supporting the continuation of arts in general, but specifically for our BIPOC students who are underrepresented. Some people, we've kind of talked about traditions of cultures and families. Some would say that music or the arts in general are not as valued as career options for certain cultures. Math and science are kind of the pathways that many students are encouraged to go on, and so that they can become lawyers and doctors, that sort of thing. You might also think about the access to music, things that'll help you continue in your music career, such as private lessons or like Royal Conservatory fees and expenses in general. And that can easily influence if you are at a lower economic status in a racialized community, whether you're actually continuing with the arts or not. But I also think that it comes back to the representation piece, because especially for like high schools, for example, you go to the open house, you're a grade 8 student, you're going to an open house to see what this school is all about, and you don't see anyone who looks like you. You don't hear music that is from cultures that you identify with. And why would you want to go to that school if you're not seeing yourself in their curriculum or their students? And I think we're stuck in that cycle right now because there's not enough representation, but the people aren't motivated to go to those schools because there's not enough representation. And it's kind of, how do we actually get out of that? I know in Peel, one of the things that we're trying to do is in response to actually a review that was done by the Ministry of Education to see how specifically Black students were treated and if they saw themselves in the curriculum. There was lots discussed in this Ministry of Education review, but it was found that there is a lot of anti-Black racism that currently exists in the Peel District School Board, and as a result, they're trying to dismantle this in a variety of action projects that they've committed to. But one specifically is changing the process of regional program applications, whether that's for the arts programs or if you wanted to go to the International Baccalaureate program or the Science and Technology program. All of them has kind of their way of applications for Black and Indigenous students in particular has changed recently. So I'll just run you quickly through what the normal application is. So normally you would apply, you'd have an essay or an audition or an interview of some sorts, and also attach your marks. Once you've made it and passed that application process, then your name is put into a lottery system. And every student who has passed that application can then be tossed around in this lottery, and then it's just luck of the draw. They pull out 80 students or however many spaces they have, and those are the people who go for that year. However, for Black and Indigenous students, they've taken out that lottery step. So as long as they're meeting the program requirements, they're guaranteed a spot at that school. So it's not just a free handout, but they've noticed that there is that lack of representation and they're trying to change that. And I think definitely that's a step in the right direction, because that's our way of getting students to be at those schools. But the problem is that it doesn't guarantee that Black and Indigenous students are actually going to be applying in the first place. So what I'm trying to do as a music educator, especially in the middle school sector things, is to be instilling that passion for the arts early on, exposing them to music from cultures around the world, cultures that interest them, cultures that they see themselves in, and highlighting musicians that actually look like them as well. Because I think when students begin to see themselves in the curriculum, they see those opportunities that they can have, and they can envision themselves being in that profession in the future. So I really hope that through those little steps, showing more representation, achieving more representation in our schools, that they'll begin to continue with music education specifically in the future.
Thank you so much, Kathleen. Vanessa, you and I talked a little bit about, like offline, talked a little bit about repertoire choices. So just curious if you want to share a little bit about that to the audience.
Yeah, absolutely. So right now, for many auditions, whether it's for orchestras or you're auditioning for a school, most of the rep that they ask, they usually say, they either give you a list of excerpts, or they say it must be a piece of standard trombone repertoire or whatnot. And while it is useful for you to learn the standards, it doesn't really give a lot of room for contemporary and BIPOC and female musicians for their music to be used in auditions. And it's just, again, you're sort of fighting this battle of like, I really want to include BIPOC female musicians and composers into what I learn, into my repertoire, but then now you're looking at the requirements for these huge organizations, and again, like I said, there's just no room. So it's really, really hard because, you know, racism, like we've mentioned many times before, it's just really, really baked into our system. And it's really hard to separate the two when the system is racist and racism is the system. And there's many steps. I know that I think the University of Toronto is thinking of including a piece written by a BIPOC composer. They're requiring it for everyone to have a piece for their jury. So it's really nice seeing that sort of progress. But again, it's just, like I said, it's really hard to incorporate diverse composers when many times, most of the time, you're preparing for auditions and there's just no room for that. Yeah.
That's a really great step. I'm glad that like just to hear that with U of T. And I think the only thing that we'll have to be wary of is that tokenism, because oftentimes it's like we're checking a box and saying, oh yeah, see, like we have included this, so that that's great. But we need to get to that step where it's no longer going to be like a requirement for them. It's just something that's ingrained. Well, obviously you're going to showcase these composers because it's just what you do. But it's it's a process, right? So I think this is a great first step. I just hope that we'll get to a spot where it's not having to showcase people of color, but just showcase composers in general.
Absolutely. And adding on to what you just said, you know, sometimes in some of my classes, I've had to like maybe pick a piece to show the other people in the class, and we just sort of do like a listening session. And suddenly when you pick a piece that is written by a person of color or a woman, then you're some sort of like social justice warrior, or you're so brave, but you just picked it because it sounded good, right? And again, it's just really important that we make these little steps, and hopefully one day we'll live in a better future.
And I think it's also going to be become a funding thing that will fuel the change, because it was the same way with Canadian content. If you wanted to apply for a Canada Council grant, you had to perform one work by a Canadian composer, and then that got it known. And so now it's just going to be the same type of thing.
So on top of that, and I can really relate to this, is that, you know, for students who are really that are considering pursuing music as a career, and that transition between high school and, you know, university college readiness, sometimes there's a wider gap for some individuals. If, for example, like it is not, you know, the student's family doesn't have the financial means to afford private lessons, then that student will really have to rely on their teachers in their, you know, current education, music education system, to really help give them the resources and tell them exactly what steps that they need to take to pursue music. And yeah, so just let's talk a little bit about, you know, what can we do? Like, I mean, it's quite clear that sometimes it's harder to recognize that, but sometimes I just feel like, you know, I had a part-time job and I paid for every single music lesson, and I could only, you know, invest in what I could afford because, you know, at the time when I was growing up, my mom was a single parent. So, you know, like investing in my private lessons is not a priority, right? So, yeah, just what are everyone's thoughts?
Well, I think that there needs just to be like a whole start over from the ground up, because we can come up with all these programs for people, but we haven't actually asked them. We don't have the information from the horse's mouth. So I think that, I mean, we have in Manitoba anyway. You have music programs starting from kindergarten, and then at grade 6 you could take band optional, but still there's dropout rates, holes in the pipeline. So I think that we need to actually formulate some questionnaires and do some research at the ground level instead of at the ivory tower, and find out the reasons why the kids don't pursue music. And so like we're trying to devise questionnaires that we can give to Manitoba Honor Band kids and Youth Symphony kids and provincial honor bands, National Youth Orchestra of Canada, and ask people, what are your barriers facing you from becoming a professional musician? And then addressing that with then like trying to organize the programs to patch the holes in the pipeline. But it's a very large project and we're just getting started like brainstorming with that ideas like that at Orchestras Canada, for example.
And I think something else that can be a hindrance is not fitting into that classical music bubble. For example, in my program at the school I'm currently at, we have a small band program, but our instrumental music is, we have steel pan drums, we have hand drums, we have guitars, we have keyboard, but they're not learning necessarily the classical music avenue of sorts. So our students, the local high school also has similar programs with the steel pan, and they have like a drum line and things like that. But those students are getting a quality music education. They're not being enticed to continue with music after that because there aren't the programs there for them. The instruments that they've been learning and they've been excelling at aren't represented in a Bachelor of Music. So I think maybe even just having a more diverse avenue for them would be something.
Yeah, I totally agree that we have to broaden our definition of what is music. Like usually if you ask someone, they'd say, you're on this big stage and there's 50 of you on the stage and it's this orchestra. But like what Kathleen has just said, that's not necessarily the case. Anyone can make music, even if you're just humming or anything. And I think there's also a huge, like, there's always pressure to do things the right way, the classical way. Like, for example, you don't need to read music to become a musician. And suddenly, if you say that you don't know how to read music, then you're sort of, yeah, it's like totally unknown. Or like, what do you mean you can't read music? Like, that's how you read, that's how you learn everything. But really, you can totally learn things by ear or just by having someone teach it to you, and that's just as valid. And I think, like what Michiko was saying, we really have to build things from the ground up if we want to be more inclusive.
Well, I mean, not talking from the ground up, but once you get higher off the ground, like in university level, I think that ethnomusicology should be mandatory. So, because I think that the whole racist white, like I learned a lot in ethnomusicology. I basically learned that music is not a universal language. The physics of sound is universal, but music is really tied to individual cultures. So, and I actually got even illustrated more because I worked at, I volunteered at a zoo in Honolulu, and I worked with orangutans and also elephants. If you ever look up the Thai Elephant Orchestra, they gave the elephants just a bunch of gamelan music instruments, and for the first part of the day when they got the instruments, they were like whacking on the gamelan instruments, and they were just using consonant intervals, and then by the end of the day they were just whacking on the dissonant things. So they just kind of went through all of Western classical music in a day because of the physics of sound. And then going back to Honolulu, I was trying to teach this orangutan how to play Twinkle Twinkle, and I came and I played my horn always in the same key at the end of the session, and we designed an instrument. So, like, he used to wreck everything because they used to hide food, and he'd have to find it. So he would wreck an instrument that we made. But so we had to have this toy piano that we held it up outside his cage, and he played Twinkle Twinkle with his tongue through the cage. But then the Orangutan Foundation came and got mad at us because they said we were colonizing Rusty and Violet, the orangutans. And so it's like the same thing. Like, my training, it's like, oh, well, he has to learn the Western music. And it wasn't just my culture being forced on another culture, it was another species, right? So we have to always step back and like just question everything. That was a huge tangent, sorry.
It's quite relevant though. Wow, it's already 4:24. Okay, let's move on to the next question. So, of course, we've identified that, some of the gaps in our education system. We share a little bit about, what's really made it hard for us to get to where we are. So I guess the next question is, how can we make it easier for future generations? And what tools are currently available to help promote and advance EDI, equity, diversity, and inclusion? Maybe I guess I can go first. Like, a couple of resources that were shared with me. One is the cultural pluralism in the arts movement in Ontario. So there's just a lot of like nonprofit organizations that are really going above and beyond in promoting diversity in the music scene. And then there was another resource. It's in the form of a podcast called Whistling Vivaldi, and it's based on this book that was written by a musician who just talks a little bit about stereotypes, racial stereotypes, and the association with classical music. And I think that's something worth having a listen in. It's called Whistling Vivaldi.
Well, I think for me, mine was all just like financial barriers. But when I went to Juilliard, I studied with Jerome Ashby. He was the associate principal horn of the New York Philharmonic, and he was the only African-American musician in the New York Philharmonic from 1979 till 2007, I think it was. And so, like, he was my big hero, and he didn't really have to talk about anything or do anything. Just the fact that he was sitting in that chair was hope for me. Like, well, he did it, so I can do it. So I think if you have a hero, that would be good. But also, we could all be the heroes for somebody. Like if we're successful, then that might inspire other people.
Absolutely. I think that first step is always speaking out and speaking up and really finding people that you can talk to when you feel that it is safe to do so. And like we've mentioned before, that it can be really hard to speak up when you're maybe the only person of color, the only female there. But when you have a good support system and you find people that can really help you, it just helps to sort of express yourself and not bottle these things up. There's also some tools online that I have found really helpful. There's this website called Anti-Racist Music Theory Examples. So a lot of, again, like we said before, a lot of racism is just in the system. And sometimes when you're, say, teaching music theory, there's no reason for you to only have examples by white people or males. You can totally, the same music theory concepts apply to any music. So this website has really helped me. Another website in sort of the same vein is Music Theory Examples by Women. Again, these are two websites that have incredible resources and can help music educators or anyone out there who just wants to learn about new pieces of music by people of color.
Yeah, I think just going back to the idea that we can be that representation for people. I really like that. I don't know. It made me smile thinking like, oh, well, maybe that's like, now it's my turn. And realizing that like role models that people need are right here in this chat. And I think it would have made such a big difference for me to see those faces in orchestras when I was growing up, in the music education scene. And I think already the fact that we're talking about this will be making a difference for future generations.
And I hate to put any pressure on anybody, but I think we also have to be awesome. Like you can't like lead some panel and like whine about being a person of color and then go on stage and be like, right? You gotta like go and kick some butt. So that you can be the inspiration for other people. No pressure.
So collectively, we have collated a list of resources that we will be putting on our website. The intention is just to share and on your own time as you see fit to explore these resources, and hopefully that will help guide you and it's help in any way and to make a difference in our music industry. Thank you so much to the three of you for just being so awesome. In the words of Michiko, you are so truly awesome. Thank you so much for your generosity in sharing. It's not an easy topic to talk about, and we are putting ourselves kind of on the spotlight here. So I just want to acknowledge you and thanks, for just, I'm so inspired because, we're all here because we want to make that difference. So thank you so much. And of course, this is one of our first conversations, but it won't be our last. So hopefully, we will have these discussions again and maybe in person when we're able to. We will be posting a list of resources and some other follow-up materials from the previous sessions as well. I do want to invite everybody who is watching, just thank you so much. On behalf of the Canadian Women's Brass Collective Committee, we are so grateful that you have taken the time this afternoon and tuned in. It really shows, it feels great. We're doing this for you. We're doing this for us. We're doing this for everybody in our music community. So we're so grateful. And having said that, I just wanted to invite you, if you do have a quick moment, if you can please, we're going to post a Google form thingy majig survey for a post-event survey, and we just ask if you can just take a moment to voice your feedback, and we really do want to hear from you, because this will inform how we deliver our future sessions as it relates to these important topics. So thank you so much. I also want to do a little bit of a plug. We are going to have another event. It's coming up in May, and it'll be led by our very own Jen Stephen, Dr. Karen Bulmer, and Audrey Beauvoin Lafamboise, some stellar, really fantastic artists. And some teaser topics include self-compassion, its relationship to motivation, how to effectively navigate time off during summer months, as well as career diversification. And some pretty heavy topics there, but we really do look forward to doing more of these online events, because that's just our way of staying connected with everybody. So thank you so much. And then finally, I just want to send a kudos to our backstage leads, Louise and Jesse. Thank you so much for managing the live stream and for all of your support. So, and having said that, I guess this really this concludes our CWBC online series for today. And thank you. Stay safe.